thing we have to remember, I think sometimes we forget, is that Great Britain wasn't the only country that was claiming land in the New World. That's what we've talked about because that's where our heritage came from, was from Great Britain. But actually the vast colonial territories in the New World were claimed by other countries as well. Some that established colonies across the world were France. We've talked about those guys. Portugal had colonies. Spain and the Netherlands, okay, all had colonies in America. So we just kind of got to remember that Great Britain wasn't the only country that was coming to this country, okay? Now, these colonial areas that the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Netherlands and the Great Britain, people from Great Britain, they were kind of prizes that they were willing to sacrifice and you know, spread blood over. They were not going to give these up easily. And you've got to remember that these countries in Europe were trying to do colonies not only in America but all over the world. And so during the between 1600 and 1700, these European nations were always engaged in constant warfare with each other. There's always some conflict between these powerful European nations between 1600 and 1700 because of these colonies. They were willing to fight and shed blood to have their colonies in these other countries besides Europe. Now we'll kind of go back to the New World in Britain. Okay, what did Britain control at this time? We spent all this time in class talking about what did they really control at this time in the New World? The 13 colonies, and what else? Where are we getting all that sugar from? The West Indies, okay? So, in the New World, the British flag, and that's what they did, the British flag proudly waved over islands in the Caribbean and over the 13 colonies that were along the Atlantic seaboard, okay? So, it's kind of interesting. Anybody want to guess what was the population of the 13 colonies at this time in history after the establishment of Georgia? Anybody want to guess what the population of all 13 colonies was?
750,000.
That's pretty close. Actually, it was 1.5 million. You were halfway there. So there were 1.5 million people in the colonies that the Royal Navy stood guard over during this time. Men, women, and children. About 1.5 million people that were British citizens lived in the New World when we got to 1700. Now we mentioned that Britain had really two powerful enemies at this time, not just because of the New World, but just in general. Who were the biggest rivals that Great Britain had? French and the Spanish. Okay, so you got to think about this a little bit. Where was the Spanish possessions in America? Anybody know? Were they in this area here at all? No, they were really Florida and what we consider now to be the southern boundary of the United States. This was all Spanish possessions here. Okay? Here are the English possessions. Where are the French possessions? Here. Now, if you look at that map, get that map out that I gave you. I want to make a point on that. I think this the one? No, this is the one. I didn't make the right one. But let me make a point here. What you have is you've got, in this area here, colonies that belong to who? England. You've got colonies this way that belong to, and you've got, now, and then pay attention because you've got colonies here that are disputed, that both France and Britain think they have claim to, and then over here, what do you have? French. So you got English, disputed, French. And that's going to be kind of a problem. It's going to lead us to a conflict. So, if you talk about the South, again, the Spaniards, they had a series of forts and missions that stretched from Florida to California across what we know now as the southern border of the United States. That's where the Spanish possessions were. Now, we didn't worry about that too much, and I say we, and I shouldn't say we. The British didn't worry about Spain too much. First of all, they weren't in an area they were that interested in at the time. And secondly, the Spaniards had been declining power from a powerful perspective, weren't near the threat they were. So really Britain didn't have too many conflicts with Spain. They weren't bothering them in the area they had, and they just didn't really care. To the north, though, and to the west of the colonies was a place called New France. So these colonies that were over here, that were French claims, and this into Canada, that was known in history as New France. So there were French claims west of the 13 colonies. So, who's the bigger threat to the 13 colonies in England? Spain or France? France, no doubt, no doubt. So this territory that was claimed by the country of France was a big landmass, you can see, and because of that, they wanted to protect their colonies, so what did they do with their military and naval power? Strengthened it, okay? So both the Royal Navy and the Royal Army are all stoked to protect their colonies, the English colonies, and the French Army and Navy are stoked up and strengthened to protect their colonies. Because they're willing to fight and give up blood to keep these colonies in the New World. So the biggest threat to Great Britain was not Spain, but France. So now we're going to talk about French claims in North America. How did they get this land that they claim they have? Okay? So French claims in North America. Anybody know who two of the earliest explorers to North America were from France? Verrazano and Cartier. Very good. Yeah, it's okay. He answered it. So French claims in North America were based on very early voyages by Verrazano and Cartier. They were French explorers early that came in. And because of their voyages and their explorations and findings in North America, the French claimed that area. When they came in and claimed this area over here, who did they completely ignore who was already there? Indians, yeah. So they came in, the French, and claimed that land, ignoring any claims the Indians might have had to the lands, and their ancestors had lived there way before anybody else. So we continue to go back, and it'll make sense when we get into the 1800s, late 1800s, on how we continue to not recognize that the Native American was the first one here in America, and we just kept taking and taking and taking. Okay? Now, there were a lot of early French explorers, but the first French explorer to establish a settlement in the New World was Samuel de Champlain. So there were early voyages of Verrazano and Cartier before Samuel de Champlain got there, but he was the first one to establish a settlement. The other two fellows were just exploring and reporting back. Sort of like Lewis and Clark explored the Louisiana Territory and reported back. Did they settle it? No, they just explored it and reported back. That's what Verrazano and Cartier did. The first French explorer to actually establish a settlement in the New World was Samuel de Champlain, and he made his first voyage to America in 1603. In 1603 is when he made his first voyage. And he was the first French explorer to establish a settlement there. 1603. Now Champlain died in 1635, but he did several things for France and the New World prior to his death, and I'm going to give you 3 examples of what he did. So before Champlain died in 1635, he accomplished several things for France, okay, in the New World. He was very instrumental in the French claims to the New World. What was that settlement he built? He was the first to build a settlement. What's it known as today? Quebec. Very good. Quebec, Canada. So one thing that Champlain did before he died in 1635 is he built that settlement we know today as Quebec. He also was smart enough to befriend the Indians that were there. It was a very powerful tribe called the... No? Algonquin Indians. Okay, he won a powerful friendship with the Algonquin Indians. So he kind of was smart enough to figure out he better, get along. And the third thing he did, he was the one that explored the St. Lawrence Valley. You guys understand what the St. Lawrence Valley is? Where's the St. Lawrence River on here? Anybody know?
Like in the corner? Yeah.
right here. And what's it lead into? Great Lakes. So he explored the St. Lawrence River, and he also went into what we know a little bit as New York today, and he established the area around the lake that's named after him. Lake Champlain. Okay? So, again, the first French explorer to establish a settlement in the New World was Samuel de Champlain. He made his first voyage in 1603. Before he died in 1635, he accomplished several things for France in the New World. He built a settlement at Quebec. He won the friendship of the powerful Algonquin Indians. And he explored most of the St. Lawrence River Valley and established the area around what is now known as Lake Champlain, named after him. Now, once he did that, other French explorers went down the St. Lawrence into the Great Lakes and really hit the northern part of this northwest country right here. And I'm talking about land that's east of the Mississippi. So other French explorers came right through the Great Lakes and just hammered right in here in the northern part of that wilderness. And some of those important explorers were Joliet and La Salle. There were two very important explorers who, after Champlain established the St. Lawrence River Valley and Lake Champlain, those guys came down, explorers, and really pushed into the heart of what we call the North American wilderness. Because all of this land up here is all wilderness country, isn't it? Okay, it's wilderness. So after Champlain, Joliet, and La Salle come in and explore that area we know as the North American wilderness even more. Another person that came in was a missionary by the name of Father Marquette. Ever heard of Marquette University by any chance? Okay. So Father Marquette, a missionary, came in. And this is an important thing to remember because we're going to start talking about this later in history. In 1673, Father Marquette and Joliet, the explorer, they decided that they would cross these Great Lakes. If you can imagine, they came down the St. Lawrence through the Great Lakes, and then they went cross-country, and they got onto what body of water? The Mississippi River. So in 1673, Father Marquette and Joliet crossed the Great Lakes between these two Great Lakes right here, Lake Erie and Lake Michigan, and hooked on to the Mississippi River. And they paddled down the Mississippi and they went all the way to the mouth of the Arkansas River, which is in Arkansas, obviously. So those guys in 1673, Father Marquette and Joliet crossed the Great Lakes from Lake Erie to Lake Michigan to the Mississippi River, and they paddled down the Mississippi River as far as the mouth of the Arkansas River. So they were really making some progress, weren't they? Right? This is all going to come into being. Well, 8 years after Father Marquette and Joliet crossed the Great Lakes and paddled down the Mississippi River to the Arkansas River, La Salle follows the same route, and he goes all the way to where?
New Orleans.
Even farther. There was no New Orleans at the time. He went all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And what did he do when he went all the way down there? He claimed all of that route for France. So French has the claim of the Mississippi River Valley all the way from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. And that happened in 1681 and 1682. That's when La Salle followed the same route as Marquette and Joliet did, but instead he went all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and he claimed that entire Mississippi River Valley for France. And what did he name that area? Louisiana, after French King Louis XIV. So La Salle follows the same route all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. He claims that entire Mississippi River Valley all the way to the Gulf of Mexico for France. He names it Louisiana in honor of French King Louis XIV. Are we following pretty good here? You seem to be. And finally, in 1718, the French built the most important seaport probably in the South at the mouth of the Mississippi, now known as New Orleans. So later in 1718, the French, after claiming that land in 1681 and 82, finally built New Orleans near the mouth of the Mississippi River. And this area becomes very crucial later in history to the United States. We're going to end up acquiring this, are we not? And it's going to lead to what we know as the Lewis and Clark expedition and all kinds of things. But this is where it started, so you get an idea of how did we ever get in a position to get this land. This is how it got, so to speak. Okay? So I want to just review this to make sure we have it. Okay? So after Champlain pushed through the St. Louis River Valley and through down to Lake Champlain, other explorers such as Joliet and LaSalle explored the same area, the northern American wilderness. And then in 1673, Father Marquette, a missionary, took Joliet and they crossed the Great Lakes and paddled all the way down the Mississippi River to the mouth of the Arkansas River, which is where present-day Arkansas is today. And they thought that was pretty exciting. So 8 years later, in 1681 and 1682, LaSalle followed that same route that Joliet and Marquette followed, only he decided to go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, and he claimed that entire Mississippi River Valley for France. And he named that vast area Louisiana in honor of French King Louis XIV. And in 1718, the French built New Orleans, which turns out to be the most powerful seaport in the South, and maybe in the New World at the time. Okay? So, you think about it. By the early 1700s, France controls the two major gateways into the heart of North America, right? What are they? What?
St. Lawrence.
They control the entrance of the St. Lawrence River and New Orleans. So they control the whole waterway, kids, to this area here. They have both passageways. They have the key. They have the door and the key to open to do that. So they have New Orleans, which gave them control of the southern entrance to the entire Mississippi River Valley, and they also have two settlements now that gave them control of the St. Lawrence River, Quebec and Montreal. Okay? So the French are really tied in tight to this area right here of the United States. This is all French land. Okay? What does England have? The 13 colonies and the West Indies. What does France have? This area in here, and this area in between, which we'll talk about, is disputed. This is what we're going to have a conflict over. Okay? Yeah. It's Quebec and Montreal are up in this area here. My eyes are so bad. Here's Montreal here, and Quebec. Okay? These are two gateways into the St. Lawrence River. So, let me repeat that. By the early 1700s, France controls the two major gateways into the heart of North America. Number one, New Orleans, which gave them control of the southern entrance to the entire Mississippi River Valley. And then they also have in the north, Quebec and Montreal, which gave them control of the St. Lawrence River. So who were the early recipients of good word having control of the Mississippi River? What group really enjoyed having that waterway? French trappers and traders, because they control the entire thing. Now, not only do they have access to the Mississippi, what else do they have access to? Every single tributary that runs into the Mississippi. They can go up those waterways. So they have an incredible, vast area they can control. They basically could travel the entire region between the Appalachian Mountains. They had the ability, because they owned this. Think about this. Here's the Appalachian Mountains. They had the ability to travel here all the way through here, because all the waterways came off the Mississippi, right? And can anybody else get on the Mississippi? Can Britain get on the Mississippi? No, because they don't control either waterway in.
What were the two groups you said?
basically French traders and trappers had that full ability to go wherever they wanted. It'd be pretty difficult for someone from Britain to get over here and explore with it, because they have no way to get there, because they don't control any of the waterways to the Mississippi. Every waterway that runs into the Mississippi or runs into a river that runs in the Mississippi, the French have access to all of that, clear over to the Rocky Mountains. Okay? So that takes us to our next subtopic, which was French settlements and the fur trade. Why that was so important. Okay, now let's just think about this. Most of the first French settlements, now settlements are places where people settled, were between Quebec and Montreal, not a very long distance apart. So most of the first French settlements were farmhouses that were between Quebec and Montreal. That were the first settlements. That's where people settled down. Okay? So the first settlements, and most settlements early in this vast area that France owned, were farmhouses that basically stretched between Quebec and Montreal. Also, they had some things, another settlement was where? Besides Quebec and Montreal, where else would people have maybe settled? Around New Orleans, okay? And you also had farming down in that part, and there were a lot more what in the New Orleans area than there were in the Montreal, Quebec area? Slaves, very good, slaves. So, when you think about settling, French settlements, the first settlements were basically stretching between Quebec and Montreal. They were farm settlements, and there were settlements around New Orleans which used slaves. But what was